Not too long ago, people used to believe that communists were in America, that they had infiltrated into our very cultural structure and were trying to undermine America from within. Now imagine that, capitalism versus communism, the two biggest ideologies on the planet of how to rule over a nation. Should the nation be more democratic, where it gets to vote and rule itself? Or should the government be in charge of making everyone equal? Well, these two systems of governance are seen the world over and often are in direct and competing conflict with each other. And especially during the Cold War, when we had nukes pointed at each other, everything became underground in the fight. And so again, not too long ago here in America, we were like, they're not coming at us with soldiers and missiles. How are they coming at us? And then we began to look through the American culture and we began to see communist ideology springing up. And then people were like, there's where the communists are. The spies and saboteurs are among us. And so they set out to root these things out. Now, today in our culture, you can't get Americans anywhere to believe that we're under attack. You cannot get anybody to think that there are bad ideals being implanted into our culture and bad people are climbing in ranks and position to undermine our culture, even though they speak out openly against American ideals. And that is incredibly surprising. But let me just share this with you. Let's say that I was anti-American and I wanted to destroy America. Well, you cannot attack the military because they're just too strong. Historically, America has had the strongest military on the planet. There's just too much resources with technology. Capitalism has allowed us to advance, and there's just no one has been able to keep up. And so if you can't attack a military from without, maybe you can attack it from within. And I want to postulate a few ideas to you to tell you quite honestly that I believe that the American military is under attack from within. One of these reasons I believe this is because there has been a shift from performance to wokeism or things like that, like gender equality. There is this push not towards performance, but towards making everything nice and equal and fair. And in fact, from what I understand, some of the fitness tests here recently have been kind of held off on because they're trying to figure out how to make things equal between boys and girls. I mean, if the tests aren't going to be fair for boys and girls, then it just doesn't fit the American ideal. That, in fact, is not the American ideal. Have we not learned anything from the transgenders that have abused the system lately, where these men are entering into women's sports and dominating? Who among us can't tell that guys typically are not stronger, faster, have more endurance, are more aggressive when it comes to physical activities? I mean, we've got absolute proof of these things. And have we learned nothing from that? So this shift in ideology, I believe it's absolutely on purpose to help weaken us. I mean, are the militaries around the world doing this? Is everybody becoming all equal and nice and fair? Or are they training like madmen on a mission of some sort? Well, along with this, now we are advertising cartoons. And you probably already know about these two things, but we're advertising the military via cartoon. I don't understand what planet these people are coming from. This makes absolutely no sense. And this is why we cannot recruit anybody that should be or needs to be in the military, because cartoons aren't impressive. That's soft and childlike and for kids. And anybody that's going to respond to that, it's almost like you're trying to weaken the military on purpose. Now this last one here, this really pushes me over the top. But now we are supposed to train our soldiers in basic training without yelling. Now, from what I understand, I think this is I don't know which branch this is, but it's coming, and it kind of fits with the whole woke idea and gender equality and the softness of life kind of aspect, and utter garbage. But we're not gonna yell at the recruits. And I thought at first, I was like, what idiot thought of this? Like, what dumb moron? But I don't think anybody has really thought of this except for those that are bent on destroying the military. Why would you plant such ideas unless you were trying to weaken the military? And so I think this might actually be very on purpose. Now, I will state that to me, this is laughable. I mean, this is laughable. But we have women drill instructors training men. I've got 3 sons right now that are pushing into adulthood who, just by the average training of life, they would laugh at any kind of female trying to enhance them in their physical performance or fighting abilities. I mean, that is ludicrous. But from what I understand, this one drill instructor lady, she was like, well, when I yell at the troops, they just don't, they don't give me any kind of respect or authority. And to quote my wife, who is a woman, so I will let a woman speak on this matter, she's like, what man, like what real man would ever respect a woman that is not as strong or as fast or has as much endurance or can tolerate as much pain? Like, what man is going to be motivated and inspired by such grand leadership? Now, I am not a misogynist. I am not against women. Wow. But anybody that can't see the clear difference, why can't they see the difference? What is their agenda? Now, in case it isn't on purpose, maybe it's accidental, but I want to help you with the psychology of understanding why we should yell at troops. In case you just can't get that, or in case you need to be able to explain to other people why we should be able to do this. Like, number one, yelling creates emotional intensity in the person being yelled at. I mean, we're talking about going into war, for goodness sake. We're talking about a time of shock. The shock values, people, when they enter into warfare, they talk a lot of times about people that even have been trained go through shell shock. Like, all of a sudden, there's the cracking of bullets, which they've actually heard before, but now they're actually aimed at them, and they see people dying around them, and they hear explosions, and there's fire, and there's darkness. And from these awful things, full-grown men who have actually been trained for battle still wet and urinate on themselves. When's the last time you've been in a conflict where you urinated on yourself? Come on, I'm waiting to hear. You can put that in the comments if you want to, if you're willing to admit that. But what kind of shell-shocked situation would you have to be in to actually pee your pants? And we should be creating an emotional callousness in a person so that they can kind of endure these type of activities, unless of course you don't want them to be prepared for those kind of activities. So yelling creates an emotional intensity and says, hey, this is different than the things you have done in the past. I mean, can you imagine the soldiers getting out of the bus, these soft soldiers that, they followed the cartoons there, and they're here for the bonus. And so they're going to come fight, not for America, but they're going to come get a paycheck. And they show up, and then you don't yell at them. Like, it's things as normal. And they will think that life is as normal. And when they get to the battlefield, they're just going to run. It would be too emotionally intense for them. And they're going to melt down at the first moment. Sounds like it's on purpose. Well, something else about yelling. Personally, I have this experience many times throughout my life in many different situations. But do you know what precedes physical combat, physical fighting? Yelling. It's almost as if yelling goes hand in hand with fighting. You're at a location and you see person A yelling at person B, and the more they yell, all of a sudden they want to get their fists together and they want to beat each other, and there's some kind of emotional intensity inside that has been amped up by yelling. One of the reasons that we would yell at soldiers is to get them ready for combat, unless you don't want them to be ready for combat. I hope you're making the connections here. Also, if the authority over you does not have a bad side, you will not listen. You won't. It is human nature to do our own thing, and unless the authority over us has a bad side, a disciplinary side, a yelling side, unless those over us have a mean and nasty side, we won't obey them. And this is so funny because, raising children, I have 10 children, and they're all incredibly obedient, and they're incredibly nice and respectful. But it amazes me looking at other parents that can't control their children. I'm like, well, what are you trying to please your children to death? Like, are you just trying to lead them down fairy tale ways? And then your child becomes rebellious and never listens. And it's because you don't know how to be authoritative and take control and mastery over the child and mold them into something. So if you don't have a bad side to authority over someone, even looking at theology and looking into God, the reason people ultimately obey God is they're terrified of Him, and what He will do to their life. And you find those that say they're theological or say they're deep Christians who are not scared of God, you'll find disobedient children, plain and simple. Also, what about the purpose of yelling is this pressure to conform. The reason a coach would yell at one of his players is because that player is offering subpar performance or subpar obedience, and we are going to correct that. That is never going to happen again. You are going to be a unit with us. You are going to do things according to plan as we dictate. We're going to be together, and everybody's going to know what everybody else is doing. You cannot step out of line. That's what coaches do. Maybe before revamping our military, and since we have so many sports out there, I want somebody to go out there and get a league. I don't care if it's baseball or hockey or whatever. And I just want you to just totally eliminate all yelling, and let's keep stats for 5 years and see if the statistical performance of the people goes up or down based upon the authorities over them being able to lay in them and correct them and their motives. Why don't we try it with our sports teams who we can afford to lose versus trying it with our military that we can't afford to lose? Well, one of the things I know that's going to be pushed and is being pushed is like, oh, we're more civilized today. We shouldn't yell because we're more civilized. Wow, are you 20? Like, have you only just lived on your parents' couch and just barely made it through school? And I bet you haven't even paid any bills yet if you think that, we're just more civilized and that's the way we should apply things to war. War is barbaric and destructive and painful and has a whole lot of evil to it. And we want to civilize warfare? I guarantee you that if you take a barbaric group of people and put them against a really civilized and passive and non-yelling group of people, I can tell you who's going to win. And this more so helps me understand that these moves are intentional. You need to take notes, and here's the two things you need to prepare for. Number one, you need to begin to voice this concern to everybody you know. There's other things in life we could be passive about and say, oh, this doesn't matter. But if our military is not getting proper and appropriate training, I guarantee you the walls are not going to hold. The walls that keep bad people out of our country and from taking over, they are not going to hold. And so if you don't voice these concerns to your leadership and get some changes made, we are going down a trail that we're not going to come back from, which brings me to the second point. You need to begin to prepare your family for not having a military at all to protect them and your communities. Because if we're, changing the fitness test to be softer and more relaxed, and then, we want to advertise with cartoons, and then we don't want to yell at anybody, somebody is trying to destroy your military, and you better get up and do something about it.